So the announcement landed with the force of a constitutional thunderclap behind palace walls. A decision that had been protected from public view was suddenly confirmed. Catherine had been granted a secret Queen-Regent executive authority, placing extraordinary responsibilities directly in her hands. For Prince William, King Charles and Queen Camilla, this was not simply another adjustment in royal duties. It changed who could act, who had to listen, and who could no longer assume their position was untouchable. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Buckingham Palace tightened around the news. Senior officials were called into a restricted briefing after a communication intended for only a handful of principals moved through private offices. Catherine received her copy quietly, but the significance was enormous. The confidential Queen-Regent authority was a delegated executive arrangement, allowing her to carry out specified sovereign functions whenever the king could not personally exercise them. It was real working power. Catherine read the confirmation twice, then sat in silence. When she finally spoke, she did not ask what privileges came with it. She asked whether King Charles fully understood what this would do to the family. Her concern was immediate because authority inside the monarchy is never just paperwork. It changes access, influence, and who makes the final call when pressure rises. Prince William felt the shift just as sharply. Pride came first, but unease followed. The future king understood that his wife had crossed an invisible threshold, entering decisions once handled almost entirely by the sovereign and heir. He supported her, yet he knew every choice Catherine made would now be judged as evidence of the monarchy's future direction. Queen Camilla reacted differently. She took the sealed briefing, found the paragraph defining Catherine's executive reach, and read it again before lowering the page. The Queen Consort understood that this was not ceremonial positioning. Certain matters could now move forward without her influence, and that realization carried a sting no public statement could soften. King Charles had signed the authority, but he had also redrawn the private balance within his household. The deeper shock lay in what the briefing did not explain. King Charles had prepared this quietly rather than during an ordinary reshuffling of royal duties, suggesting he was planning for circumstances more serious than a routine absence. Catherine could now act. Prince William had to adjust. Queen Camilla had to accept the change. But one question still hung over everyone. Why had the king chosen her? The document explained what Catherine could now do, but it did not explain why King Charles had chosen her. That answer was buried within relationships suddenly trembling beneath the crown. Power rarely arrives without a price. For the four people standing closest to this decision, the cost was immediately personal. Catherine had gained authority few imagined she would exercise this early. Prince William now had to reconcile partnership with constitutional hierarchy. King Charles had placed enormous faith in his daughter-in-law, and Queen Camilla faced the uncomfortable realization that a woman once expected merely to support the future king could now make decisions carrying consequences throughout the royal household. Catherine felt the weight before she felt the power. For years, she had moved gradually from senior working royal to one of the monarchy's most trusted public figures, taking on duties that demanded discipline, restraint, and consistency. Now, the distance between ceremony and executive responsibility had vanished. This new role was not simply about standing beside the heir. It meant that certain decisions could reach her directly, carrying the authority to shape what happened next within the royal structure. Prince William understood how unusual that made their position. He remained the heir, the man expected to inherit the crown. Yet his wife now held a delegated channel of authority that could operate separately from his future kingship. In private, he warned Catherine that everything around her would now be interpreted differently. A silence could look calculated. A disagreement could be treated as a power struggle. Even a simple decision could be read as a signal. She answered quietly that refusing responsibility would be more dangerous than accepting it. King Charles carried a different burden. Relief sat beside something almost like sadness as he reviewed the authorization again. The king knew why the change was necessary, but he also understood what it admitted. The monarchy had to be able to function even when he was not personally guiding every decision. That realization cut deeper than any signature. He had spent years holding the institution together, And now part of protecting it meant preparing others to act without him. Queen Camilla felt the shift in a sharper way. She asked a senior aide whether Catherine's authority included household appointments and direct access to sovereign briefings, the private information normally reserved for the monarch and those acting on his behalf. The aide hesitated before answering. That pause was enough. The queen consort understood that the boundaries had moved. Catherine discovered the most unsettling details soon afterward. Buried within the authorization was a private schedule listing circumstances in which her executive authority would automatically expand. That meant the arrangement had not been designed merely for temporary convenience. It had been created with long-term contingencies in mind. The arrangement had not been designed for one isolated emergency. It had been built for several possible futures. Suddenly, the question became impossible to ignore. King Charles had not created this structure out of caution alone. Something had happened. To understand why the king moved so decisively, the story must return to one specific evening when a routine royal discussion became the point of no return. The secret authority did not begin with a lawyer, a constitutional memo, or a carefully staged palace meeting. It began with a moment of hesitation. During one private royal briefing, King Charles asked for a decision to be carried out while he stepped away from the discussion. What followed exposed a dangerous weakness. Nobody in the room agreed on who possessed the unquestioned authority to act. That confusion lasted only minutes, but for the king it was enough. King Charles had already been pushing the household toward greater continuity and delegation. He wanted a slimmer working monarchy, but he also wanted one strong enough to keep moving if illness, absence, or crisis suddenly removed a key figure from the room. Catherine had quietly been given deeper access to briefings, allowing her to understand how private secretarial work, state duties, charitable commitments, and ceremonial responsibilities connected. Those briefings were not titles or honors. They were practical instructions that kept the institution functioning from one decision to the next. The turning point came at Windsor. King Charles instructed the group to approve an urgent alteration to an upcoming state engagement, and then stepped away before the final authorization was issued. Prince William believed the order was clear and expected it to move forward. Queen Camilla disagreed. She asked who exactly had the authority to approve the change while the king was absent. The question froze the room because nobody could answer without risking a challenge from someone else. Catherine refused to take advantage of the uncertainty. She told Prince William and Queen Camilla that they should wait until King Charles returned rather than pretend authority existed where it had never been clearly defined. Her restraint prevented an argument, but it also exposed the deeper problem. When the monarch returned and learned why the decision had stalled, he did not blame her. Instead, he saw proof that even loyal people could become trapped by uncertainty when the crown needed speed. King Charles carried that frustration to Princess, and in a private conversation later that evening, he told his sister that he never wanted the family fighting over authority during a genuine emergency. The Princess Royal understood immediately. She argued that any temporary executive power had to belong to someone capable of protecting public confidence, while also resisting private pressure from within the household. King Charles asked one simple question: who? Princess Anne answered without hesitation: Catherine. The name settled the matter more quickly than either of them expected. She had shown restraint when others might have pushed forward, and that restraint became the strongest argument for giving her power. But the decision did not remain private for long. Queen Camilla learned that Catherine was being considered for formal emergency authority, and this time she was not prepared to accept silence. The weakness had been exposed. The solution had been identified. And now the palace was heading toward the confrontation everyone had hoped to avoid. There were no cameras, no secretaries, and no audience. When the question finally came, Queen Camilla entered expecting an explanation and received something far more unsettling: confirmation that King Charles had already made up his mind. The argument was not about jewelry, precedence, or who stood where at a ceremony. It was about power. And when she asked the king why Catherine had been chosen, the answer revealed exactly how much the monarchy's internal balance had changed. Queen Camilla did not soften the question. She wanted to know why Catherine had been placed at the center of the new framework, and she wanted the answer directly from King Charles. The Queen-Regent authority, as it had been designed, was not an immediate transfer of the crown. It was delegated executive responsibility, meaning selected sovereign duties could pass temporarily to another person when the monarch could not personally act. That distinction mattered legally, but emotionally it changed very little for Queen Camilla. King Charles held his ground. When Queen Camilla asked why Catherine, he answered that the decision had nothing to do with affection, favoritism, or rank. King Charles said the monarchy needed a single operational authority during moments when hesitation could damage the institution. And Catherine had already demonstrated that she would not reach for power simply because it was available. Queen Camilla pushed harder. She argued that granting such authority to one person would inevitably reduce the influence of everyone else closest to the sovereign. She was no longer asking for reassurance. She was challenging the logic. King Charles answered with equal firmness. Protecting everyone's feelings could not become the principle guiding emergency decisions. If the crown became paralyzed by family sensitivities, then the structure itself had failed. Queen Camilla changed direction. She asked whether Prince William had requested the arrangement. King Charles said no. The future king had not designed it, demanded it, or pressured anyone to approve it. Instead, the monarch explained that the idea had emerged from his private discussions with Princess and following the confusion at Windsor. That answer unsettled Queen Camilla, because it meant the decision had taken shape without pressure from Catherine's husband. Then King Charles gave the reason that mattered most. Catherine had been offered informal opportunities to step forward before, and more than once she had chosen restraint. She had waited when others might have acted. She had questioned whether authority truly belonged to her before using it. To him, that hesitation was not weakness. It was proof. The room fell silent. Then King Charles delivered the final blow. The papers were no longer sitting within a family discussion. They had already moved into formal implementation. Queen Camilla could challenge the reasoning, but the machinery was already in motion, and the next battle would be fought not over emotion, but over who actually controlled the decision. Royal power does not always announce itself with trumpets. Sometimes it moves through signatures, briefings, sealed instructions, and a quiet understanding of whose voice becomes final when uncertainty strikes. Catherine's appointment suddenly forced everyone around the crown to confront that machinery. But while officials studied procedure, the woman at the center of the transformation faced a far more difficult question. How could she exercise authority without appearing eager for it? Catherine opened the confidential briefing folder and moved slowly through its pages. The arrangement created a chain of delegated executive responsibility, meaning decisions could continue when King Charles formally activated the authority and could not act personally. The king remained sovereign. Prince William remained the heir. Catherine would step into a defined executive channel, while senior advisors carried those instructions into practice. The structure was designed to prevent confusion without disrupting the established order of succession. Catherine accepted the responsibility without hesitation. But she immediately recognized another danger. Power without visible limits could create suspicion almost as quickly as uncertainty. She stopped at the first major list of powers and asked officials to add a limitation beside each one. Her request surprised the room. She wanted to know not only what she could authorize, but also where her authority ended. That distinction mattered because one unchecked decision could turn a system built for stability into a source of family resentment. She refused to let that happen simply because the new framework made it possible. Prince William understood her instinct, but he worried about the opposite risk. In private, he told Catherine that restricting herself too aggressively could recreate the uncertainty King Charles had tried to eliminate. The prince reminded her that if officials still had to guess whether she would act, then the entire arrangement would become weaker. She replied that certainty mattered, but so did restraint. Authority had to be strong enough to function and narrow enough to be trusted. Catherine then reached the clauses that changed everything. One provision allowed her, during an activated regency period, to demand direct briefings from key royal offices rather than wait for information to pass through informal household channels. Another required senior officials to treat her activated instructions as executive directives, not personal requests. That meant hesitation was no longer merely awkward. It could obstruct the chain of authority that King Charles had deliberately created. The balance was suddenly real. King Charles had given the framework legitimacy. Prince William had accepted its place alongside his own future role. And Catherine had insisted on boundaries that made the power more difficult to misuse. Yet none of them knew how quickly those safeguards would be tested. For days, the authorization had existed mainly on paper. Then an unexpected decision forced Catherine to use it, and everyone finally discovered what her new authority meant in practice. A title can be dismissed as symbolism until someone gives an order. Catherine's first test arrived sooner than expected when a sensitive royal engagement required an immediate executive decision, and King Charles was unavailable to settle the matter personally. Suddenly, the palace was no longer debating hypothetical authority. Catherine had to choose. Prince William watched. Queen Camilla waited. Officials stopped speaking. And with one measured instruction, the future shape of royal power became impossible to ignore. Catherine listened as two competing recommendations were placed before her. A state reception had been thrown into uncertainty after new diplomatic circumstances forced last-minute changes to attendance, seating arrangements, and royal representation. The reception mattered because even a minor adjustment could be interpreted abroad as a deliberate political signal. King Charles was temporarily unavailable, so the confidential delegation he had already approved became active, placing the decision directly within Catherine's responsibility. She heard both arguments without interruption. One option protected the original plan, but risked creating an obvious diplomatic slight. The other required a more significant adjustment within the royal party, but preserved the stability of the event. She removed one page from the briefing, placed it aside, and chose the second course. Her instruction was simple: preserve continuity, reduce disruption, and ensure that no guest could mistake the adjustment for humiliation. Prince William immediately understood what had just happened. One aspect of Catherine's decision differed from the course he personally would have preferred. Yet the prince said nothing. His silence was deliberate. He knew that interfering at that moment would weaken the very chain of authority King Charles had created, and he refused to turn his wife's first executive decision into a contest between husband and heir. Catherine noticed that restraint, and its weight remained with her. Queen Camilla received the revised arrangements only after the instruction had already been issued. She read the notice alone, paused over the changes, and then returned to the opening line. The Queen Consort had not been asked for approval. She had been informed. That distinction carried more emotional force than the decision itself, because it confirmed what she had feared during her confrontation with King Charles. Catherine's authority could now move from paper into action without passing through her influence. The response from senior staff removed any remaining doubt. Officials implemented Catherine's direction immediately, treating it as an executive order rather than a personal preference. No second approval was requested. No quiet appeal was made to Prince William. The machinery worked exactly as King Charles had intended. But success came with a cost. Catherine knew the order had protected the event. Yet she also understood that it had deepened the distance between herself and Queen Camilla. Before that resentment could harden, she made a choice that no document had required. The first order had established Catherine's authority. What happened next would determine whether that authority destroyed a relationship or transformed it. After the arguments, signatures, and whispered palace calculations, the turning point arrived without officials or constitutional language. Catherine and Queen Camilla met alone. No King Charles. No Prince William. No private secretary waiting to soften the words. For the first time since the secret authority became known, the two women could speak openly about what the decision had actually done to them personally. And Catherine began by saying something Queen Camilla had not expected. She had never asked for the power. Catherine had requested the meeting because she understood what silence could become if left unaddressed. Resentment within the household would not remain personal for long. It could weaken trust, slow decision-making, and turn every future disagreement into a test of loyalty. She had spent years carrying the growing expectations placed upon her by the monarchy. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla had endured decades of hostility, suspicion, and public judgment. Neither woman entered that conversation without scars. Catherine spoke first. She told Queen Camilla that the new authority was not a victory over anyone, and that she had no intention of using it to diminish or erase existing roles. The power mattered because it had been created to protect the institution, not to elevate one person above another. King Charles had created the arrangement out of moments of uncertainty, not because Catherine wanted a larger role beside him. She also made one point clear. She would not pretend the responsibility was meaningless simply to make the change easier to accept. Queen Camilla finally expressed what had been hurting her most. Being informed only after Catherine's first executive decision had made her feel as though her years beside King Charles had suddenly counted for nothing. The Queen Consort had endured public rejection, rebuilt her position slowly, and stood beside the king through years of pressure and scrutiny. To receive a completed decision rather than being asked for her opinion felt less like procedure and more like exclusion. Catherine did not retreat. She told Queen Camilla that authority and personal importance were not the same thing. She could respect everything the older woman had endured without surrendering a duty that King Charles had deliberately placed in her hands. The answer was firm but not cruel. That distinction changed the conversation. Queen Camilla then admitted something deeper. Her real fear had never been Catherine herself. It was the realization that the monarchy was preparing for a future in which King Charles might not be able to personally hold every relationship together. For years, his presence had been the center of her sense of security. Now the institution was building beyond that protection, and she could feel the future arriving before she was ready. The meeting ended without warmth, celebration, or a sudden friendship. But the hostility had softened into something more useful: understanding. Inside the palace, the emotional battle had finally cooled. Outside, the words Queen-Regent were about to explode across Britain. By morning, a private constitutional arrangement had become a national obsession. Two words dominated broadcasts, headlines, and conversations: Queen-Regent. Some saw Catherine's elevation as proof that the monarchy was preparing intelligently for the future. Others saw something far more dramatic: a quiet transfer of influence taking place years earlier than expected. Yet one image outside Buckingham Palace captured the public mood better than any expert explanation could. People were not merely discussing Catherine anymore. They were studying what she represented. Britain reacted quickly. Broadcasters devoted extended coverage to explaining that Catherine had not become sovereign and had not displaced King Charles from the crown. Her Queen-Regent authority meant she could exercise specified executive responsibilities when the king formally activated that arrangement. Palace communications emphasized one message above all others: stability. Officials wanted the public to see continuity and preparation, not a family contest disguised as constitutional change. The crowd outside Buckingham Palace told a more emotional story. Television crews gathered as newspaper vendors held up front pages carrying a striking headline: Catherine given secret power of the crown. People stopped to read it. Some looked stunned. Others immediately began debating what it meant for Prince William, King Charles, and Queen Camilla. The phrase had escaped the careful language of palace briefings and entered everyday conversation, where every word sounded larger, sharper, and more dramatic. One broadcaster offered the story's most striking interpretation. During a live discussion, the presenter described the decision as evidence that Catherine was being prepared not merely to stand beside a future king, but to carry institutional responsibility herself whenever the monarchy required it. That interpretation spread quickly because it captured the real shift. She was no longer being judged solely by appearances or ceremonial duties. She was being judged on whether she could exercise power without being changed by it. Prince William watched part of the coverage beside Catherine and noticed something the cameras could not measure. She looked burdened, not triumphant. The prince told her that the public would eventually learn the difference between ambition and duty. She replied quietly that she hoped they would understand before every future decision became a test of her character. Soon King Charles became the center of the debate. Commentators realized that the most consequential decision had been his. Catherine could accept the authority only because King Charles had decided she was ready to receive it. That transformed the story from one of sudden elevation into one of deliberate trust. Then King Charles asked to see her again. The country had delivered its reaction, but the emotional verdict still belonged to the man who had signed the authority and the woman now required to carry its weight. In the end, the most important aspect of Catherine's new authority was not the word queen, the secrecy surrounding the document, or even the extraordinary powers written beneath her name. It was trust. King Charles had reached the point every sovereign eventually confronts. The institution must become strong enough to function beyond any one individual. Catherine had reached her own threshold as well. She could no longer stand only beside the future of the monarchy. She had been asked to help carry it. King Charles met Catherine privately and made the purpose of the arrangement clear. The authorization had never been designed to create a rival center of power or weaken the sovereign himself. It existed so that duty could survive illness, absence, personal conflict, or any moment when hesitation might paralyze the crown. In simple terms, the delegated authority allowed responsibility to keep moving when the king could not personally oversee every decision. That was why the arrangement mattered far beyond a title. Catherine understood the price. She told King Charles that accepting authority also meant accepting blame, especially when a necessary decision hurt someone she loved or disappointed a member of the family. The king answered that this was precisely why he trusted her. Power impressed him less than restraint. She had already demonstrated that she understood the burden before enjoying the privilege. Prince William reached his own conclusion. Catherine's rise did not diminish his future as heir. Instead, it strengthened their partnership. The prince could now see that the next generation of the monarchy would not survive through one person carrying every responsibility alone. It would endure through shared duty, trust, and a willingness to place the institution above individual ambition. And in that realization, the future of the monarchy appeared stronger than ever before. Shared discipline, trust, and clear responsibility would matter just as much as succession itself. Queen Camilla also stopped viewing the change as a verdict on her worth. Her private conversation with Catherine had not erased the pain, but it had changed its meaning. The queen consort could now see that the new structure was about continuity rather than replacement. King Charles was preparing the institution to survive beyond his personal ability to hold every relationship together. Princess Anne felt the final piece settle into place. The confusion exposed during the Windsor briefing had been replaced by a clear chain of responsibility. Exactly what she had urged King Charles to create. Catherine was no longer merely preparing for some distant future role. She had already demonstrated that she could carry executive responsibility when the moment demanded it. And that was the true verdict. King Charles had not surrendered his crown. Prince William had not lost his future. Queen Camilla had not been erased. Catherine had been entrusted with responsibility, because the monarchy had decided that its survival required trust before a crisis arrived. And that is why this moment mattered. Catherine was not handed a crown ahead of time. She was handed responsibility, and by accepting its burden rather than celebrating its power, she proved exactly why the palace believed she was ready. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We'll see you in the next video.